morning all, and for someone who's always the proud leader of the backbenchers community, this is really strange coming up first. So I completely echo the sentiment of the people who are sitting at the back. And an honest confession moment, thank God I left engineering and physics a while back. And I've just completely dropped all plans of actually trying to learn how to play the Casio. I think it's just way too complex. But let me begin my talk today with a very interesting and intriguing question. So are we in line with online? The question is fascinating, interesting, and actually sort of percolates down to a lot of different areas and aspects of our life. But I'm going to try and touch upon two areas. And these are two areas wherein I have worked as a professional. And these two areas are marketing and education. Right? Both follow pretty much an isomorphic kind of a graph. And the India story is very interesting if you look at these two lenses. Right? But is there a common underlying feeling that sort of combines these two mediums? Yes. So as a marketer, you're always sort of advocated, reach out to each and every possible member of your TG. As an educator, your mandate is try and reach out to the last child in the classroom. Right? So this all is very important. But let's just try and delve a little deep into this all. And what constitutes this all? Well, there is India A, which is present inside the room. People like yourself, people who are 24/7 internet surfers, people who are idea churners. There is India B, which is just outside this room. People, again, who've got enormous potential waiting to be unlocked. These are the wow generators and the innovation supporters. And there is a large part of India, which is India C, which resides in the rural area. These are your dream changers and the pathfinders of tomorrow. And between these three cohorts lies the India story, which is interesting, which is fascinating. And we will try and perhaps wear these different hats, and I'll probably request you to sort of minimize and maximize thought windows during the course of this talk. And let's just try and arrive at something which is amazing, interesting, and also shocking, right? So let's just have a look at it. So let's just wear the marketing hat for a while and just try and look at the story of India in 2014. It is something which is mind-blowing, or as in the current terminology, you would say mind-blasting, right? You have 220 million smartphones in India in 2014. That's huge. From about 7 million internet users in 2001 to about 200 million internet users currently. I mean, that's just like stupendous growth. But what is even more fascinating is what is actually about to hit us hard in the next 3 odd years. So what we're looking at are actually 300 new internet users in the next 3 odd years. Right? I mean, you can Google and you can find a lot of data points around it. But what really incites or excites me and gives this critical insight is that the next 300 million, which are going to be added, are very, very complex. So the first 100 are a lot different from the last 100. Right? So the first 100 perhaps are representative of the first two, the India A and the India B. And the last 100 is perhaps wherein we bring in the equilibrium, right? Which is India C. So we're looking at an internet economy which is more gender balanced, more mobile led, more vernacular, and exists in the rural part of our country as well. And that's a representation of how things are about to happen. And what are we looking at? A $200 billion internet economy in times to come. If experts are to be believed, actually contributes about 5% of our GDP. And if you speak to any financial expert, will tell you if a sector is contributing 5% or more, I mean, that's quite a sizable contribution, right? So this is a fantastic story. We are really sort of going way ahead in terms of technology, in terms of penetration, in terms of accessibility, in terms of hardware, in terms of smartphones. But what is the India story when it comes to education, right? So let me begin by sharing something which will make you smile, is this fact that about 97% of our children are actually going to schools, which is fantastic, right? I mean, we've pretty much maintained that enrollment ratio right across a couple of years. But the next slide or the next data point, I mean, just take about a couple of seconds to let it sink in and just ponder over it for a while before I talk about it, is this. Right? So this is also a part of the India story, right? Wherein you have phenomenal growth at one end, you've got great enrollment ratios, we've got great penetration, we've got great accessibility, but at the other end, we're looking at a large cohort which is representative of India B and India C, wherein we have students in class 5 or grade 5 or standard 5, but completely unable to even comprehend and read the text of grade 2. Simply not acceptable, right? And the story is something which is not really better off when you talk about private schools, because if you look at this graph, and I mean, forget about getting into details here, just look at the two slopes, right? So one is a slope that talks about the government sector, the other one talks about private schools. They are perhaps doing marginally better, right? But since 2008 to 2014, the graph is going down. And is going down continuously, right? So, where are we heading? Are we heading towards a point wherein there is accessibility in terms of hardware, in terms of the internet, your 3Gs, your 4Gs, but education levels really going down, right? And this is another part of, or part of how education is. So, my nephew came back home the other day crying and cribbing, and his first initial statement was, my maths teacher doesn't love me anymore. And for the first few minutes I was a little perplexed, because I was just wondering, are you upset because your teacher doesn't love you, or are you really upset because you got the question wrong? And if you're upset because your teacher doesn't love you, it's perhaps a little too early to start falling in love. But you know what, I mean, he just continued crying, and after about half an hour, he said, the other day you were trying to talk to the other cousin, and he couldn't actually rattle off the exact words, but he said, what I understood, 3 into 4 is 12, 12 plus 3 is 15, equals the number, right? So what he could not really figure out at that point in time was that the divisor is equals to dividend into quotient plus remainder. And he had a very simple question. Look, either you admit that the theorem is wrong, right? Or you give me full marks. And for him it was a 5-mark question, make or break scenario, and he said, okay, I admit, I couldn't really perhaps, figure out what's next after 3 to 4, and I could not use the presence of mind to add another 3 to it. So maybe out of 5 marks, deduct maximum 1 mark, 2 marks, but at least give me something, right? Don't give me a 0. Now his question is valid, right? But more often than not, questions like these are just left unaddressed. I have personally walked into about more than a couple of thousand schools across the country, and the way multiplication is first introduced to children, teachers use a very common phrase which say, multiplication is nothing but successive addition, right? So, and for little ones, I mean, whatever the teacher says is gospel, Bible, right? Now, when for the first time in your life, you actually end up doing 0.5 into 0.5, imagine the plight of this child. Because for all this while, you've been told multiplication is successive addition. But suddenly, when you're doing 0.5 into 0.5, the logic fails, right? And all hell breaks loose, right? And the fundamental difference between the way we've looked at education, and after having spoken to about several thousand teachers, their main, and I mean not just school teachers, but even teachers who are teaching in graduate and postgraduate colleges, the aim is to cover the syllabus. But the idea is that the child should uncover the syllabus. It's not for the teacher to cover the syllabus, it's for the child to uncover the concept. There are fundamentally two different ideas, right? And things things like these just grow on and on and on and on and on. And what happens is, by the time you reach grade 8 or class 10th, the teachers have a normal complaint. Now what do I do? I mean, the primary teacher didn't teach anything. And then the primary teacher starts complaining, what did I do? I mean, the earlier years were just not good enough. And ultimately it boils down to the birth of the child. And maybe we try and figure out some astrology or some cosmic or karmic connection that, oh my god, you cannot do maths. Let's just drop the idea, right? IPL has a lot of money. So are we going to continue the same tradition wherein we are going to allow these gaps to prosper, to widen, and eventually lead to a situation wherein, if you look at the industry, even you talk of post-grad colleges, what are the 3 skills that the industry is looking forward to? It's communication, it's critical thinking, it's creativity. I cannot really figure out any 3 books in school curricula which teach you these 3. Right? And the worst is this whole growing trend towards making infrastructure more and more cosmetic. So what happens today is, you have these fancy classrooms which have these great projectors, great videos, something being played out, and it just looks great, right? But what happens when the child goes back home? Right? So let's say you've shown a great video on the solar system, and this child is now gone back home and is trying to question, so is the solar system 2D or 3D? And the mother doesn't know. Or is it 4D? Because you also have time travel. Because he's also done something in maths. Right? So the situation is that you have information, but you have information which is shown to you in a 35-minute class or a 40-minute class at max. If I were to show you a video today on a topic which none of you understand, the max that you will be able to get out of it is about not more than 10%. Imagine these are young learners, wherein attention span is not great. Right? They're probably more attracted by this butterfly which is sitting outside the window. Right? And when you go back home, you just have these visuals. And then there is no way you can access education. Right? You also have a case wherein a large part of India are also first-generation learners, wherein parents may not be themselves literate enough to actually mentor, guide, and tutor. Right? And in a country which is obsessed with competition and marks and grades and how well is my child doing in comparison to another, God forbid if you miss the class. What happens then? Right? There is no way, no medium through which you can go back home and access the same level of quality content. Right? So, we are up against a very interesting situation. You have an India story, like I said, which is great, which is phenomenal, which is tremendous, commendable, but at the same time, oh, I think this is just running way too fast, okay. Like I said, 2 things will always fail mankind. One of them is technology, but okay. So yeah, so you have a situation wherein we're reaching at about 500 million internet users. If experts are to be believed, there'll be about, every Indian will possess a smartphone in 2019, right? So what are we looking at? And what is the solution? So what we've tried to do is, we've actually married the 2. And we've looked at, can we actually ensure that learning continues beyond the boundaries of an institution? And how do we do that? Is through this. So this is how a typical textbook looks like, or any book looks like. So for the first time in India, what we're launching is, let's say, books with mapped digital content. Right? Imagine you have a textbook which you can take back home, with smartphones being accessible to every Indian by 2019. Just put your phone on top of an image and play the video. And watch it 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, till you get the concept. Right? Can we actually work with channels wherein we can actually make these videos available even offline on a device which may just perhaps be costing 5,000 rupees as a starting point? Right? So this is something which we're really, really working hard towards, so that concepts and gaps in education are not left unaddressed. And even for first generation learners, wherein parents can't guide you, you have the video, which you can watch multiple times. The other thing is, since independence, this is what we've done as a nation. Assessment of learning, right? What we've never really done is assessment for learning. Just to give you a simple example, you're cooking food for someone who comes home, the guest says, fantastic food, right? Assessment of learning. While cooking, you're able to figure out that this thing is not going to work out. Assessment for learning. So we're making assessment as an accessible tool to children throughout the country so that they can address these gaps as and when they arise, and not wait for a parent-teacher meeting or for a mid-year examination to happen and then address, when most of the times you're only worried towards syllabus completion, right? And I'm not going to leave the stage with just a simple promise that we're working at a solution which will actually help kids solve the biggest problem of all time, the ability to visualize. If you can visualize a problem, you can solve a problem, right? Perhaps in the next 6 months' time, we'll actually see something which takes the world by storm and will be a first of its kind in the Asia-Pacific region, with a promise that all children will learn better. Thank you.